And welcome to the show. I'm Rod Rodriguez. I've got Jack Murphy here. This is another Fast Take. And Jack, thanks for joining us again. And last week, you brought us a really interesting interview with the former deputy commander of SOCCENT, who is now in the Ukraine or in Ukraine. He's in Ukraine helping them train their fighters to fight the war against Russians. Andrew Milburn. Jack, thinking about this interview, tell me what you think, man. What were you thinking about, and what was your mindset talking to Andrew about what he's doing out there?
Well, I mean, I've known Andrew for a few years, I guess, maybe since, his retirement. He did like 30 years in the Marine Corps. He was actually going to be, he was a British citizen, and was going to be a barrister, actually, and ended up immigrating to the United States and joined the Marine Corps as a private, and just had a really amazing, 30-year career in the Marines. Just one of those dudes who just loves the Marine Corps, frankly, and deployed Afghanistan, Somalia, Iraq, went back to Iraq to do the ISIS thing, and then retired and took to writing. He wrote a memoir. He would write articles. He'd write op-eds. He'd write, pieces on strategy and go on the lecture circuit and things like that. But I'm not necessarily surprised that when a huge war popped off in Ukraine, that Andrew was not really content to just kind of sit in the background and write about it. And so he went over there, and with the organization he ended up standing up, they're training Ukrainian soldiers, not, I wouldn't say on the front lines, but just off of the front lines. They'll pull soldiers off the front lines to somewhere in a rear area nearby and put them through training. And a lot of these guys never, they're territorials. They didn't have the benefit of going through like a basic training or anything like that. Some of them, like, when they put a gun in their hands, they have like no idea how to like put the safety catch on, how to reload it. I mean, that's kind of what you're dealing with in some instances. So hearing it, firsthand from Andrew and what he's doing is very interesting. There was an article in the Atlantic just recently that described him as a foreign fighter, as one of these sort of like, seat of your pants American mercenaries that goes over there to fight in Ukraine. I have known a lot of those people in my life. I would not really say Andrew is in the same category. Andrew's not running around in camouflage trying to play soldier. He's offering training to the guys who are doing that, who are soldiers. That Atlantic piece also said the same thing about Malcolm Nance, the MSNBC commentator who went over there, and yeah, he is cosplaying and camouflage and doing like PR and stuff. And I'm not the biggest fan of Malcolm Nance, I guess. But on the other hand, I would also not call him a foreign fighter. I mean, he's over there doing like on-camera interviews from Lviv, I think, pretty safe areas. So I would not describe I would not describe Malcolm Nance or Andrew Milburn as the dogs of war, to be precise.
We've been covering the Ukrainian conflict, the Ukrainian war. And it's been about 4 weeks since we last really talked about the conflict, the war itself, on Military Matters. We have returned there once again with this interview. In the last 4 weeks, we have seen Russian fighters make a surge. They're taking more territory. The headlines make it seem, to me anyway, like the Russians' victory is inevitable. It seems to me like what I'm seeing in headlines is Russian victory is inevitable. It's just taking time. Talking to Andrew and talking to the folks that that are out there right now, is this an accurate assessment, or is this maybe I need to re-examine the headlines that I'm looking at?
I haven't made a thorough assessment of it myself. I don't claim to know everything that's going on, and I do not. I have a lot of responsibilities, so I don't just analyze the Ukrainian conflict. But I have seen kind of what you're referring to, and I do think that some of it is alarmist. That the Russians have pushed forward in some areas, and they've been pushed back in other areas in this war of attrition that they're fighting. So I would definitely not go as far as to say that, a Ukrainian defeat or a Russian victory is inevitable. It seems like it's anything but inevitable. It's a pitched conflict, and Russia's lines have been kind of steadily shrinking. They've been, being beaten back. My understanding, or what I've been told by sources, is that the plan is to stall the Russians out over this summer, to just completely stall them out, and then in the fall push them back, roll them all the way back to the border. So I would not expect any big Ukrainian offensive at this moment. I think probably you'll see things remain more or less static over the summer.
I'm going to go back to the Andrew Milburn interview really quick, because there's something in there that I thought was really fascinating, and that was his description of these frontline soldiers who have gone to defend their country, gone to the fight, untrained. These are guys that picked up their AK-47, probably stood in a line, threw on some fatigues, and they were like, go this way and shoot the guys that don't look like you. In that respect, they're pulled back out from the front, taken to the Mozart Group, which is, this company that's formed by Andrew Milburn. They're providing them this kind of like basic training style. Okay, now we got to professionalize your soldiering, but it's kind of it's American basic training, almost kind of in reverse, where we take civilians, we put them in uniform, we train them, and then we put them out into the fight. We're taking guys out of the fight and putting them back in training. He said that one of the things that he was really one of the things that I thought was really interesting was what he said about those soldiers. He said they're not like, hey, I'm a war veteran, F you, you can't show me anything. That in fact, these guys are very receptive to the training. They're like, oh, hey, here's what's going on those lines. Here's what's going on in the fight. Tell me about that, because that's what I'm confronting. What is your, being a former special forces guy yourself, what were your thoughts on this training mentality? This, the idea that we're going to show these war fighters how to fight their war, just kind of in reverse.
Yeah, I think it's great. And I think I wish that special forces did this more often. I mean, this is one of my main gripes about our sort of doctrine and our approach, is that we show up in a country and we want to run like American style basic training. And we want to train our soldiers to be a mirror image of ourselves, or we want to train foreign soldiers to be a mirror image of the U.S. military, which oftentimes doesn't work. The U.S. military runs in a certain way for a certain reason. We have a global mandate. We have to be prepared to conduct operations all over the world. Our military operations are in a joint environment. I mean, it is assumed that, it's not just an infantry unit, that it's working in conjunction with artillery, with airstrikes, fighter jet support. I mean, all the logistics, the medical package, all those things that we expect in the U.S. military. But when you get into a place like Syria, the people you're training don't have any of that. So you have to modify your tactics, and your training has to be tailored to that specific force to accomplish the specific task you need them to accomplish. So putting a guy through an American style training course, like a Ranger School course or a infantry basic training course, isn't necessarily helpful for them. And you may not have time to do it either. So what you want to do is look at the situation that those soldiers, those guerrilla fighters, whoever they are, look at what they are immediately dealing with to their front, literally to their front lines, right? And that's what Milburn's guys are doing, is they're looking at it, when they come off the front lines, and they're saying, this is what we're seeing. The Russians have these drones with thermal cameras on them, or they're pelting us with 60 millimeter mortars, or whatever that specific challenge is that they're dealing with them. And then they're able to tailor the training for them to meet that challenge. And that's more realistic. And that's more something that you can accomplish out there in that field environment, where you don't have the time or the resources to put those guys through a 9-week basic training course. So it's tailored, individualized training that meets the very specific tactical needs of, that AO, that area of operation.
He also mentioned in response to one of your questions, you asked him if he thought there should be more green suiters on the ground. Should we be putting should some soldiers be on the ground providing services or support? His answer was a resounding no. He said, no, we need more contractor support. We need to put, privatized some other person here on the ground other than green suitors. What are your thoughts on the idea behind putting more contractors, more support, just not necessarily uniformed soldiers on the ground?
It's a very dicey proposition. There are American contractors in Ukraine. There have been pretty much since the beginning when this war happened. I mean, initially we withdrew everyone out of Ukraine, including all the CIA people. And then they went back in quite quickly. And there are former U.S. military people working as contractors that they've been there almost since the very beginning and are still there today, working in the background, right? They're not frontline soldiers or anything like that. They're enabling the Ukrainians to fight their war. There was a huge fear of, first that a uniformed American soldier could be killed in Ukraine, but there was also a lot of fear that contractors could be killed too. And I've been told that at least one American contractor has been killed over there. And the organization that he works for or worked for has managed to keep it quiet so far. But there was a fear that even that would be very provocative, right? Because what we're trying to avoid here is a direct confrontation between Americans and Russians, because that could cross the nuclear threshold.
And we saw some of that. We've seen some of this nuclear threshold talk. Only a couple of a month or two ago, where Vladimir Putin was talking about, kind of hinting at nuclear, saying nothing's off the table, and then some of the talk with the discussion. Well, I don't know, rumors. I don't know if this ever got confirmed, but Russian bombers flying around, with nuclear payload, just kind of to intimidate European NATO allies. So, I mean, that threat is there, and I think what you're talking about is a very it's a very sensitive pain point with American policymakers. Is how do you balance supporting Ukraine against their war with Russia, but also not, to your point, provoking an engagement between U.S. forces and Russia?
Yeah, and I think the fear of having contractors die over there has largely abated at this point in the conflict. And so I have no idea what the current numbers of contractors are in Ukraine, and no one will ever give them to me, at least not anytime soon. But I have been told that the fear of losing contractors over there has largely abated. So presumably the United States government is putting as many people in there as they feel they can and need in order to support the Ukrainian populace. But I will say that the rearview mirror, I mean, it's going to be this conflict is going to be very interesting to unpack historically.
Ideal for fishing, especially if one needs to quickly cut a line, the Romeo folding knife comes with a light carbon fiber handle with an amazing grip and a D2 steel blade. Fair warning, the blade is extremely sharp and cuts through the toughest materials. What makes it simple is the flipper tab. The knife pops open for quick use all in one single motion. Go to tektogear.com today. Tekto Gear is giving 15% off the entire purchase. Use discount code STRIPES. That's STRIPES. Go to tektogear.com and use discount code STRIPES and save 15% off your entire purchase.
I was very curious when you had first. This is a typical Jack Murphy bearing the lead. When we first talked about Andrew Milburn, you described him as an American overseas, doing contract work in Ukraine. I said, oh, okay. and then when we started talking about it, I realized that this is the former deputy commander of SOCCENT, Special Operations Central. And I was like, wow, that seems way more interesting than an American Ukraine. And but to Jack Murphy's defense, this is also somebody he's known for a long time. He's kind of past the, who this guy's, what titles he wore when he was active. It's more or less Jack and Andrew. As an outsider looking in, I was really, impressed by his credentials, by where he's been and what he's done in the past. But that also made me a little concerned. And I want to know, have you reflected on the idea that we do have the former deputy commander of SOCCENT out there right now? Not necessarily, to your point, he's not on the front line, but that line can move and shift, and accidents also can occur. If somebody like him were to get hurt or killed, God forbid, and it would be very difficult, I would think, to kind of cover up or hide that level of death or injury or whatnot. Could somebody like that, being where he is that could that be a problem? I mean, it just seemed to me, looking at this, like, wow, this could be an issue if it were to escalate.
Yeah, and then there are the Americans who are over there fighting with like the Ukrainian Foreign Legion and some of these other organizations. And like, I mean, we kind of went through this a little bit in Syria also, right? Like, what does that mean when you have an American volunteer fighter over there, or in a case like somebody who's operating in the background, like Andrew Milburn or Malcolm Nance? What happens if one of those guys gets killed? Like, what does that mean? And it seems that in our system of international norms, that to have a quote unquote mercenary, like a Wagner Group guy, or a volunteer fighter with the Syrian Democratic Forces, or with Azov Battalion, or whatever the organization is, that, as strange as it may sound in some ways, that it's just not violating the norms of warfare, that it's not triggering anything, that is, oh, well, they're mercenaries, right? And for better or worse, I mean, that's just kind of a trend that we saw it even with Blackwater and Triple Canopy and these other organizations in Iraq. And I'm not saying this is a valid point of view, but I mean, it is what it is, right? These guys are often seen as disposable, right? That they get killed and people just kind of shrug their shoulders, contractors, and that's messed up. I don't agree with that, but that is why, part of the reason why contractors get used in the first place is that they're kind of disposable. And when things go sideways and you end up with, bodies hanging from bridges and horrible things like that, it seems like it does not trigger the same response that it does with uniformed soldiers. But then there's also, I mean, there's a flip side to this too that's really interesting. If you read Sean McFate's book, The Modern Mercenary, and he points out in the beginning of it that there was an incident, I think it was 82nd Airborne, where they went in and they raped a couple women in Iraq and committed war crimes and murders, horrible stuff, and it barely popped up on the news. But when Blackwater went through like a checkpoint and mowed down a bunch of civilians, it was all over the news for a long time. So it's interesting the way that people perceive this subject, and they simply do not perceive contractors in the same light as uniformed soldiers. And there's some very like weird dynamics that come out of that. I mean, like in our movies, like in our Hollywood films, who are the bad guys in the films? They're never uniformed American soldiers. They're always contractors, and they have like some euphemistic name like Black Arrow contractors or something like that. So like, we're okay demonizing contractors, but don't say anything bad about the Marines, right?
That's one of the reasons I wanted to walk out of Avatar. I don't understand how people like that movie, but regardless. Jack, thank you for bringing us that story with Andrew Milburn. I know we've had a couple other stories right now that we're working for the episode after this one. It's one that hits near and dear to my heart as a professional humanter in the Army Reserve. This is a story of one of mine. This is the story of a human human intelligence professional who is just tragic fate. Very interested and very excited to share the story with everyone, because I think that you're all going to learn something, and that this person deserves an opportunity to be heard, at least their story.
Yeah, man.
So,
I hope I can get you to come on the episode and talk about it too, since I mean, this is your career field and you know this stuff better than I do.
that's what the fast takes are for, baby.
But yeah, it's a story about a soldier, a human intelligence collector named Michael Frody. He was a E7 Sergeant First Class in the Army, assigned to a unit under Intelligence Command, and he had long-term mental health issues, arguably stemming from a TBI that he received when he was in an IED blast in Iraq, and had these issues for about 10 years until he was working in a classified unit, and he took his own life. So the story is about him, but it's also about INSCOM itself. And they're having a real problem with suicides and mental health stuff going on in that under that command. The former commander, who had recently retired, took his own life. His sergeant major took his own life. Just a few months after Michael Frody took his own life, two guys in the JSOC unit, usually called TFO, an intelligence unit, two guys in that unit took their own lives. So there is something going on in the Army intelligence world, and I try to unpack some of it and talk about like maybe how there's a way forward to to get these guys help.
And these are very important topics. And you know what one of the things that I'll quickly touch on this, and then we're going to wrap it up. But the episode before Andrew Milburn's interview was about military housing and the terrible conditions, and how the proposed tenant bill of rights was actually a smokescreen, and that nothing changed. And we really talked about the issues that are plaguing our community, whether you're a veteran or service member or whatnot. And one of my concerns that I voiced in that episode was the lack of interest, how we kind of just fallen into this pit of like, well, that's how it's been. That's how it's always going to be. Military housing. What are you going to do? I mean, it sucks. And people just kind of like drive on. I fear that suicide can take that route, that eventually if we keep, we see enough of it and it doesn't stop and it doesn't change and the numbers don't shift, that eventually we're just going to be like, that's what soldiers do. That's what Joes do. They commit suicide. And that when we do these stories, when we talk about it, that people are going to be like, look, man, we did our 22 push-ups. What more do you want us to do? What more do you want from us?
Yeah, man. And there are tangible things we can do to improve the lives of the soldiers and their family members. And I've worked on a lot of these stories over the years. I've worked on stories about black mold in on-post housing, poisoned water, and the effects this has on the kids. In my opinion, criminal corruption around privatized housing on Army bases. I worked on a story recently about having a daycare center built for 7th Special Forces Group, and talking to the different wives and spouses about like how this impacts their lives, because they don't have daycare for the children. The kids end up in the team room with dad, which is pretty cool for like a day. After that, they probably need a real daycare center. So I've learned a hell of a lot over the years, because when I was in the military, I was just a single guy. But as a journalist, talking to family members and the spouses and the soldiers and about all of these different things, mental health issues that come from the job, military housing, the lives that the spouses have and how difficult it is to be a military spouse, the husband getting deployed all the time. And then all the other things that affect our service members, sexual assaults, domestic violence, suicides, homicides in some cases. I mean, all this stuff, I mean, we can't necessarily silo it off and just compartmentalize it. I mean, this is like these things hit our soldiers in their totality, right? It's all of these things combined. And I do believe that there are tangible steps that can be taken to fix this stuff. I mean, not completely. We're never going to completely get rid of it, but like black mold in housing, like this is a solvable problem. You know, poisoned water, these are solvable problems. Like we can fix this stuff.
Yeah. And a lot of this is awareness. A lot of this is not just awareness. Let me take that back. I think we're aware. I think that the suicide and sexual harassment, like this all kind of fits in the same boat. Sexual assault, sexual harassment, suicide, and terrible housing conditions. We're past the awareness stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
People know there's a problem.
Yeah. We know it's a freaking problem. The question is, what are you going to do about it? And I think that so many people are just kind of reserved. They feel defeated because the system is bureaucratic. It's full of red tape. There are roadblocks, and we have so many different positions of, oh, that's not my job. That's the deputy undersecretary of this guy to this guy and this guy third cousin removed. That's his job. And if you want to talk to him, you got to do this packet, 25-page packet in triplicate. Good luck. There are so many of these types of people just said, F it, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Housing is what it is. But awareness helps, action counts. And I'm just at the point where we do these stories and I'm hoping for more and more action. I'm very glad to see the Vanessa Guillen story that we did. Part of the result of that was change, actual change, physical change. We saw people get fired. We saw people shift. We saw people move. We saw different things occur. So we're seeing action. I'm just hoping that as we go forward, we see more action. But I'll leave it at that. Jack Murphy, thank you for that interview with Andrew Milburn. Folks, if you haven't had a chance, there was a whole lot more in that interview that I think that just very fascinating to hear from somebody who's there right now in Ukraine, side by side with the war fighter, and what we're seeing in Russia, what we're seeing in Ukraine in the fight against the Russian military. It should hit home. It should hit close to home because we just don't know what the next engagement is. Force on force is the thing that we've been preaching to the military, our military, for the last couple of years as the war on terror has wound down, is that the next engagement will likely be against a uniformed military. We won't be fighting ISIS or Al-Qaeda or some necessarily a terror organization on the same scale that we did in Iraq and in Syria. That the next engagement will be against a uniformed service with tanks and air power and the ability to reach out and touch us where our previous enemies never could. So it's important for us to keep an eye on Russia's engagement with Ukraine. I tell folks all the time, this is one of the very few times in history where the U.S. gets to analyze someone else's conflict as opposed to our enemies analyzing our conflicts. So, Jack, any parting words before we hang it up?
Man, there's so much to talk about these subjects. I got plenty of parting words. Save it for another time, though. I think said about as much as we can for a fast take.
Sounds good. And I waited till you had your mouth full of whatever the hell you're eating right now to ask you the question. All right, folks, that's Jack Murphy. I'm Rod Rodriguez, and we will see you at the next episode.
This episode is brought to you by Tektogear, TEKTOGEAR.com, a Portland, Maine-based tactical knife company. The knives are created by the CNC process to provide the best precision, functionality, and beauty. The Tektogear knives won't cost you half a month's rent either. Today, Tektogear is giving 15% off the entire purchase. Go to TEKTOGEAR.com. Use discount code STRIPES. That's STRIPES. Go to Tektogear.com and use discount code STRIPES and save 15% off your entire purchase.